Welcome to a Courageous Conversation. We are Courageous Healing. With it being Minority Mental Health Month, this month of July, we thought that it would be important for our team to come together and just have some real, raw, honest, authentic conversation. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to be talking about the trauma of racism. But before we get into talking about this topic and kind of discussing the mental health aspect of things, I thought it would be important for us all to introduce ourselves. So my name is Aaron Lane. I am the co-founder of Courageous Healing, Inc. I am also a master's level social worker, as well as master level organizational leadership and development.
Hi, I'm Janelle Lane, his partner in everything, his wife, also co-founder of Courageous Healing. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I specialize in everything trauma, also cultural issues, and I like to say that I specialize in creating more culturally centered therapists. So that's who I am.
Hi, I'm Frederica Rogers, and I am a master's level social worker.
Hi, I'm Microaggressions, Bratton, and I'm also a master's level therapist.
Hi, my name is Raphael Basel, and I'm also a master level therapist.
Hi, my name is Melissa Hall, and I'm a master level social worker who specializes in trauma-informed care and addictions.
So now that we have identified who everyone is, again, I want this to just be a real, raw, transparent conversation. I want it to be we're just here enjoying ourselves, talking about real issues. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last several months, we're all aware of the many different issues and pandemics and all those different things that are going on. So with our topic today of the trauma of racism, it's important to shed light on, the death or the murder of George Floyd. So with that, I'd like to just open up the conversation and get your thoughts around what have you been witnessing that's going on with the current state of events? May it be with the individuals that you are serving through mental health services or just your own personal journey and testimony. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you've been noticing or just even processing and thinking about?
I'll just say for me, I've witnessed normal cultural trauma amplified. So, people having this response to racial injustice and awareness of racial injustice almost like it's on fire right now. For people of color who live this journey day in and day out, right now there's no escape. It's constant. Every different channels and streaming networks that you turn on, they all have like a Black Lives Matter section or Black movies and shows as soon as you first turn on the television. And it's almost like, literally everywhere you turn, it's being discussed. So it's almost increasing traumatic symptoms because there is no reprieve from it currently. So I will say I've been seeing that, and I've also been seeing increases in white clients presenting with cultural trauma for the first time, where they are unable to get this stuff off of their mind, unable to sleep, overcome with grief and guilt, and don't know what to do with it. And so I have a lot of white clients now seeking me as a therapist because they want somebody that understands this burden of cultural trauma.
I think you hit on a lot of interesting points there in this aspect of trauma and just how aware everyone is about everything that's going on right now. Like you said, it's all up in your face, right? No matter what. When you turn on the television, when you turn on the radio station, that's what everybody's talking about right now. So as we think about this, for me, it's almost like as I'm trying to process all this stuff, it's overwhelming, right? It's overwhelming. It's almost like I'm tired of it, right? And then I cut on the television and here I am living it again. So it's again, you can't escape it. But it becomes overwhelming at some point. It's almost like, what do you do with it? It's so much.
Yeah. I can speak just from my personal experience. For me, is that I found myself just numbing out to what was going on around me. Not so much because I didn't want to feel it, but I just didn't know how to respond once I allowed myself to feel it. So in moments I found myself shrinking. In other moments I found myself puffing up. Shrinking because I was intimidated by what I was aware of. Puffing up because I felt as if I had the responsibility of actually doing something to solve it. So because I didn't know how to handle that, I found myself just numbing out, not wanting to feel anything, trying to avoid the conversation, whether they were white, whether they were black, just didn't want to deal with it at all.
I think to go along with that, one of the things that I'm noticing is the weight of the awareness of the suffering of others. So, like, being a more collectivistic culture and knowing how impacted other people within the culture are currently. Also, maybe sometimes feeling a little bit responsible to carry some of the weight for white people who are having reactions, some for the first time, some, experiencing it the same way we have, always been aware, but now this newfound inability to escape it. And so I've just felt overwhelmed, if I'm honest and transparent. Like, I have felt the weight being a therapist also in a different way. A lot of my friends who are therapists are like shutting down and needing therapy themselves because it is overwhelming.
Yeah, I found myself these last couple of weeks being catapulted into activism. So whereas before I'm a social justice person, so there's always something that I'm going to throw my weight behind. But this has become my sole purpose lately, is this idea that I have a lot of white friends, I have a lot of white individuals who are asking me to be the educator, to be an ally alongside them, to speak truth about what's happening. And so whether or not I've wanted to be in this role, this is the role that I find myself in constantly. If I'm not trying to relearn myself, there's someone asking me to educate them along the way. And it is very exhausting right now.
That's so interesting, because every time one of us speaks, what I'm hearing is the word responsibility jumping out, right? We have a responsibility to address these things. We have a responsibility to talk about these things. But in reality, is it our burden to carry?
It makes me think about what we've been kind of talking about. It's come up several times this week, and we're learning. Like, we're all still learning. So I think that's also another myth, is that you've got this stuff all figured out if you are a person of color. And, like, honestly, we're still learning. And so one of our newfound things that we've learned is that for so long, our white friends who really get it, we've been so grateful to have them get to the seat of advocate. And they feel like they've achieved their necessary role by being in that seat of advocate. But we're starting to come into awareness of the fact that that seat is not necessarily for them. Like, this isn't a black problem. It wasn't created by black people, and the solution doesn't lie in black people. If we had the solutions and the ability to change things, it would have been changed centuries ago. And so it requires that white people use their power and their influence and their positioning and their voice to drive this thing. And so almost looking at it as, a driver with a blindfold on, taking directions from their friends and trusted, black allies, because that passenger seat is really ours, and I think that's a new perspective for me. So when people ask, like, what can I do? It's almost taking a different perspective to position myself as the advocate instead of taking on that burden or responsibility.
Adding that extra responsibility to you in a moment where you're already in crisis. So, like, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to process all of what I'm seeing. And now you're asking me to help you through a moment where, like, I need help. Let me be the person who's getting assistance. But instead, okay, let me tell you what you can do. So that, I feel like I've had several conversations with colleagues where that's what we've talked about, where it's like, it's okay to not take on that responsibility. If they need to figure something out, you don't have to be the person they get it from. So I feel like that has been one of the biggest things for me. It's just like, and I'm not in a place right now to actually tell you what to do, because I might not have something nice to say right now. And that's just being honest. So,
like, making space to not be okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing we're doing in our cross-cultural relationships, is being honest that we're not okay. Like, we really aren't. We're having hard days. There are some days where I have the energy to make sure that you understand this aspect of it. And there are other days where I don't have the energy to be present for my children right now. And so I have to balance it and set healthy boundaries, and be able to have trusted enough relationships that I can feel safe saying, I can't do it today.
And I think that's been my biggest struggle. It's just exhaustion, being called upon to educate. And it's like, we've had a disadvantage for 400 years, and now I'm having to still educate. So that's just has really been a burden for me, is having to educate and experience and try to process, okay, the trauma that we're seeing right in front of our eyes. So that's, the biggest thing for me.
I think part of the challenge of it, though, is if we don't sit in that role of educator, then we're almost expecting people to take on this role of, driving it without the experience themselves. Like, it almost requires that we be transparent and vulnerable to help make sure this thing is moving in the right direction, to make sure that there is context, to make sure that they understand, so that they're pushing the right priorities. Because understanding a need and understanding priorities is different. You may see that, social injustice is a need, but if you don't understand what the priorities in that are or how to communicate those at a table, then you'll get a bunch of well-intentioned, well-meaning folks sitting around a table developing, systems and strategies and procedures that don't include the voice of the people, which is kind of what has happened traditionally, how we got all this systemic racism in place, in the first place.
I think what I was referring to may be the surface level things. Everybody is surface level, and we are having to educate why Black Lives Matter. Why do I have to? Why do not everyone we get all lives matter, but why do I have to educate why this is a thing right now? I think that is the piece where I'm saying, like, I'm exhausted explaining things that should already be visible to everyone.
I think it's the defensiveness.
Yeah.
The having to meet that defensiveness of protecting the purity and the positioning. And we've been calling it like the burden of proof.
Yeah.
It is the weight of the burden of proof that this stuff is real and valid, and that it impacts people. The constant need to continue in the face of it being defended to.
I definitely think you have that aspect. And you also have the aspect of many individuals, because again, just like it's in our face, it's in their face. So they're having to live it, right? And when I say they, I'm talking about our white counterparts, our white brothers and sisters. They have to live it as well. They're experiencing it just like we are. And it's driving many of them to guilt, right? It's driving many of them to feel like, although I didn't have anything to do with slavery or that 400 some years ago, people are saying that it's still impacting them and they're looking at me in a certain way, right? So it's that guilt, and now they're being driven to do something, right? And for me, when individuals have called me with that guilt and asking me, what can I do? I need to do something. I feel like I need to do something. I've stepped out of the educator seat. And my real, raw, transparent answer is, what is your heart telling you to do? What is your gut telling you to do? And that's what you need to do right now. Because I don't have the words and the answer for you. I told one individual who's a friend, cross-culturally, I told him, I said, it's really hard when I have to go from watching the television of a man who looks like you kill a man who looked like me, and then you call and ask me for an answer or a solution. And it took a lot for me to be able to say that to him, because I respect him and I honor him, and I value him wanting to do something, right? But it's too soon. Right? You came at me a little too soon. I'm still a little raw. I'm still a little sensitive, right?
Yeah.
But I do think we have to educate. But I think there's a time, right, that we have to educate, and people have to give us time, because although we're therapists and social workers, we too have feelings, right?
Yeah.
We too have to process and deal with what's going on inside of us, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's all great points and great conversation, but I even want to take it almost taking it a step back, because people are probably wondering, okay, we're talking about racism and we're talking about trauma, right? How are trauma and racism connected? Like, what's the intersection? What's the connection point? How do those two things meet?
So I think, like, when you look at the trauma response is evoked. It's your natural defense mechanism that's built into your body. It's automatic or autonomic, that keeps you alive. And that response is evoked anytime there's a threat to your safety and well-being. So when you look at racism, is racism a threat to your safety and well-being? Historically, yes, it is. Present day, yes, it is. It is a threat.
It's very real today.
It is a real, honest, tangible threat even today. And so what it does is your body then kicks into fight or flight mode. When you're met with that threat, your body starts producing cortisol. Your body then starts reacting to the cortisol. Your breathing is increased to help you be able to run or fight. Blood is pushed out to your extremities to help you be able to fight. Digestion is slowed. So this is also why people of color lose weight slower, because they are traditionally living in environments where they experience higher levels of toxic stress or constant stress. So they have that cortisol or that fight or flight response happening more, where digestion is slowed. And so because when you're in fight or flight mode, your body is not focused on being able to digest your food. It's focused on being able to keep you alive, survival. And so you have people living in this state of being triggered or agitated or activated, and then living daily life
Yeah.
with that amount of cortisol.
Yeah, and I would take it a step further, because we know now with epigenetics that it is embedded in our very DNA from past traumas that have happened to our ancestors that kept them alive. So you roll into a situation you've never been in before, and your body is already telling you you were in danger. There are no visual signs maybe, but it's embedded in your very DNA. Get out. You are in danger right now, because your ancestors have passed that down to you in the very fiber of who you are.
Yeah.
And so we're dealing with that, and then what we can visually see and hear and taste and touch. And so you have both of those combining when you're looking at trauma and when you're looking at racism in our current day.
So imagine what type of response you carry into a workplace if you're the only in that setting. And your epigenetics is encoded to tell you, is this a dangerous situation? Is this a threat? Potentially. So you are carrying your fight or flight response into work every day.
It's that when you grow up in a certain environment, you're looking over your shoulder all the time. But now you're just sitting in boardrooms looking to your left and your right all the time.
But then
It's
you
just
have
one of those things.
that constant reminder anytime you turn on the TV or anytime you get on, it's like you can't get away from it. So you're just re-traumatized until eventually you start to just completely shut down to it. So now you're just
Numb.
completely numb. So you're watching someone, be beat by the cops, and you're just like, oh, there's no reaction. So I feel like all of that mixed together, it's like, how can you not talk about trauma when you talk about racism?
I think this is why, if you have the ability to build authentic, honest, transparent, cross-cultural relationships as a person of color, that's an amazing skill up against the backdrop or the context of the fact that you have this embedded in your epigenetics that this person could be a threat. We carry that into our cross-cultural interactions. And you have to navigate around that to get to a point of trust with a person that looks different than you. And so I just think that that's a deep concept if you really pick that apart.
You got me over here thinking a little too deep.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
And it's a skill set, but the reality is those individuals who are able to do that and willing to do that, I'll even go a step further and say willing to do that, there's a cost, right? There's a burden, because you have to deal with microaggressions, you have to deal with harnessing the feelings and emotions, your feelings and emotions, to save theirs, right? And to save face for them, right? So when you guys talk about numbing, right? You have certain individuals who just numb themselves because they don't want to deal with it, they don't want to feel it. And then you have that response of that fight response, right? So you have the flight of the numbing, and you have the fight response of the people who are out there looting and protesting and doing those things. That's what that is. That's that trauma response. That's that response of, I've had enough, right? I got this cortisol. What am I supposed to do with it, right? So now my action is to go out here and fight, right? And whatever fight looks like for you, that's what you go out and do. And again, you have those individuals who also retreat. I dealt with it too long. I've had enough. The burden is too heavy. I'm numbing myself so I don't have to deal with it. It's heavy, right? It's even, let's be honest, even sitting here right now amongst a team, amongst family, amongst friends, this stuff isn't easy to talk about, right? And not only is it impacting us, right, as we sit here as individuals, as men and women, as colored people or black people, whatever people want to refer to us, as we sit here as those...
Don't say colored people. People of color. That's different. That's a different connotation.
People of color. But it's some people sitting at home right now referring to us as those things. So people are referring to us as many different things. Whatever, we're beings, right? But we also have families. We also have loved ones. So as we're sitting here talking about this and we're processing all this information, how is it impacting our families? Not only our families, the families of individuals who look like us.
I would say That's a great question. That's it. But I'll honestly say it has changed the dynamic of what the conversation is like. Just say a traditional family eats dinner together. Normally they talk about, hey, how was your day? Now immediately we got to process, hey, what were you exposed to on social media?
Yeah.
So our family dynamic, I have 4 young children and I'm a foster mother. It's completely changed. We actively are protesting downtown in front of the courthouse. We're going to meetings. I'm involved with Facebook groups. And so the kids, instead of going to dinner now, are going down to protest. So it's completely transformed our life. And there are so many questions that are happening about being safe because of COVID. So, if you don't want to put on a mask because it's hot and it's uncomfortable, then you need to be 6 feet away from whoever you're standing next to. Why do you have these signs? These signs are important because it's letting those drive by know what you stand for. Why do you stand for it? Because we have criminalized people's color. And so when you are guilty from the moment you were born, there is something wrong with that dynamic. And we are going to stand here until that is changed. And this is something tangible that we can do because we can do hard things when it's important. And so the whole dynamic of our family has changed. And I am the fiery, I'm not the numbing out. That's not my coping mechanism with this. And so I'm using my voice, my social media platform, whatever I can tangibly to do to make sure that this message is promoted, even when it's my 2-year-old who is, running around and trying to figure out what's happening. So
That's good.
Yeah. I think for us, because we are in this day in and day out, and because this is it's who we are, it's a calling, we were prepared for this before we knew we needed to be prepared for this. We don't turn this off. This is a piece of us. And so when things are tense, when we're feeling it, our kids feel it. And our kids are 2 and 5. And so we've tried to have age-appropriate conversations, which is hard with 2 and 5. And I explain for 20 minutes, and then I say, do you get it? And he's like, nope, and then goes to play. But it is important to me that he's educated, and this is my 5-year-old, my son, that he's educated and prepared for what he may experience so that it doesn't catch him off guard and confuse him, but that I don't project my biases or any challenges or struggles that I've had onto him. And that is an impossible task. It is a fine line to explain something to a child. How do you explain something that doesn't make sense? How do you explain that as sweet as you are, as sensitive as you are, as spiritually grounded as you are, sometimes your presence, just your mere presence of you walking in the room is going to disrupt the whole environment of the room. People will have an issue with who you are. How do I explain that to a 5-year-old? How do you explain it to a 7-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old?
A 29-year-old.
A 29-year-old. What's the appropriate age to have these conversations? And so they feel it. They feel it when we feel it. And so we've been having to do a lot of emotion regulation and dealing with, meltdowns and temper tantrums because they don't have the words to express their feelings. They don't know. They just know they feel something, and they don't have the language. So
An interesting thing to add to that is not only does the children not have the language, but oftentimes the parents don't have the right language, simply because they didn't prepare for it. How many of us honestly say, hey, I got to prepare for dinner tonight because a cop is going to knee down on a black man's neck? So oftentimes, if I'm forced to have a premature conversation, oftentimes I'm going to mishandle it. And I don't even have to aggressively mishandle it, but I can mishandle it with the right intent. But just because I do something with the right intent doesn't mean that a person is excused from the consequence of mishandling the conversation.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the way it impacts marriage dynamics, so that's not something that people talk about regularly. It's how does racism impact marriage dynamics? But let me just give you an example of how it could impact. So if you're a black male and you're raised to believe, or you've learned to understand that your presence disrupts an environment, you then get into a position where you learn to defend your presence. You defend your identity. You have to defend your position always. You learn to minimize yourself in certain situations so that you don't disrupt the environment. And then you learn to sometimes, control your rage, control your anger. Like there's all these different things that you have to navigate. So when you get home, the last thing you want to do is to defend your identity, to defend your being. And if I am a black woman who is raised to understand that I need to mute my voice and my presence to make other people uncomfortable, my voice becomes so important to me. When I come home, the last thing I want to do is mute my voice. So then you have a woman in a relationship whose voice matters the most to her, and she's got to be able to share it. And then you have a man that she's married to who has to always defend his identity and his presence. So I'm defending my position and my ability to vocalize. You're defending your presence. Who's communicating well? Who's supporting, validating, understanding the other person's position? This is why so many relationships and marriages suffer with layered, trauma, living in, underserved areas, or living, with having limited resources or other barriers that you have to navigate. And then you've got these dynamics that you're dealing with in the home and out in the world. And kids are witnessing these communication dynamics.
Can y'all tell who she was talking about in that example? No.
It's just an example, not you.
No, but it's real though. Because I would agree 100% with everything that you just stated, because as men, especially as black men, right, we're already devalued out there in the world. We're already less than. We're already, not good enough. So we have to be in this prove ourselves mode all the time, right, and put on this face and try to have this value and carry yourself in a certain way. And when you do get home, you want to let down, right? But may not always be the place to let down, because you're also an example at home, right? As she mentioned, I have a 5-year-old son that I have to lead the way, right? I have to show these things. I have to show what a man is supposed to handle himself like, how a man is supposed to treat a woman. I have to be in this leadership role. I'm the leader of the home, right?
Which is just, I think this is why it's so important that we have transparent, authentic conversations. We have to we have to normalize it, make it normal to have these authentic, transparent conversations where we can share with our kids, mommy is not okay today. I'm here. I'm always going to be here for you, but I am not my best self today. And to say with my spouse, today I'm not okay. I need to be able to be safe today. And I think we've got to start communicating at that level instead of feeling like we always have to be strong or so put together.
So as we've done a lot of talking about the family, right? We all know that the family, the consequence that the family plays when it comes to racism, or the burden that the family have to carry when it comes to racism. This all started, again, way before, right? It's systemic. Racism started from a systemic place within our institutions. And as we all sit here as therapists, as we all sit here as social workers, in our line of work, in the calling that God has placed on us all, what do you guys feel like, or how do you feel like the institutionalized racism or systemic racism has played a role in how mental health services are provided today? Or do you even feel like it has?
I'll say that's a great question. To be honest, I don't think a person could say that there is an institution racism, especially in the mental health field. Just looking at it at a surface level, if you go to one side of Fort Wayne versus the other, you got to ask yourself how many times are you going to run into a mental health facility? Does it make sense? So it's there. And if we go to, I would say, the older generation, how do you ignore the Tuskegee experiment? So it's there. It has created the distrust in a system that's trying to convince us that it's in place to help us.
I think that lack of education and even knowing, like, I didn't even know what mental health was until I found myself in the field. So I think that lack of education and knowing that it's okay, like you said, it's okay not to be okay, and that there is help, there's professional help out there where I can go and vent and take off this facade that we wear as Black individuals, whether you're a Black male or a Black female. There's a safe place to go and speak about it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the biggest issues is we just talked about you walking into a room and you being a problem or being considered a bad person just because of the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's kind of shied a lot of people of color away from therapy and counseling is the fact that they're walking into a room to speak to someone who don't look like. Can I really trust you? Like you ain't gonna know what I'm talking about. Like I have to explain to you what it's like to go through some of the stuff that I'm going through. Like you don't know what it means, but I can come in and talk to somebody who looks like me, who understands what I'm saying, and I don't have to explain what certain terms are, what it feels like to be treated differently because I'm Black. I think that's one of the big things that has played a role in why a lot of people of color are shying away from it. But we're here.
But even when you think about kids in the school system and they're being diagnosed, what's the word I'm trying to say? They're being incorrectly diagnosed.
Yeah.
Because of the trauma that they're enduring at home. And then they come and they bring it to school, and then they're getting diagnosed with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
When it's really cortisol. Yeah. Yeah. You can't sit still when cortisol is telling you, go, do something, act.
Yeah.
It's telling you you're in danger, you need to respond. But be still. Sit in your seat.
And even if you're not labeled with that diagnosis, you're still being sent out of the classroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, kiddos in our school systems, if you are someone of color, you're aggressive, the adjectives that are placed on you are much harsher than your white counterparts. Mm-hmm. So you already have that as part of your internal dialogue. Mm-hmm. When you're 4, 5, 6 growing up, whether or not you ever get a diagnosis or not, you still have those adjectives running through your mind constantly that are just adding again to the trauma.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, this has been great conversation. I'm sure we as therapists and social workers can sit here all day and talk about this stuff, especially when it comes to the trauma, right? The trauma of racism. We can have these dialogues and conversations all day and start going down rabbit hole, if you will, when it comes to the systemic nature of racism. So as we leave this conversation, some things that I'm hearing from a solution standpoint, some things that need to come to the forefront and start happening on a more regular basis is have the tough conversations, right? Whether that's in your workplace, whether that's in your relationships, your family dynamics at home, wherever you are, wherever you feel most comfortable, have those conversations. Have the courageous conversations, right, as we're doing here today. Access, as you mentioned, when you drive from one side of the town to the next, are you seeing mental health and therapy facilities, right? So access is important. And then I'll just say educate yourself, right? Do the hard work of educating yourself. Whether you're Black, educate yourself on your history. If you're white, educate yourself, right? So that we don't always have to educate you, educate yourself. So those are some practical solutions. So as we, again, adjourn this conversation, I just want to thank my team, Courageous Healing, Inc., all of you guys for your willingness to join in on the conversation, to have the tough conversations. And I look forward to our next courageous conversation.
Thank you.